Tertium Organum by Pyotr Demyanovich Ouspensky. Chapter 1. Subjective and Objective Reality. The most formidable challenge lies in discerning that which we truly comprehend from that which remains unknown to us. Consequently, in any pursuit of knowledge, we must first establish what we accept as given, and what we deem to require definition and proof, namely, distinguishing that which is already known from that which we seek to discover. Regarding our understanding of the universe and of ourselves, conditions would be ideal were we bold enough to take nothing for granted, treating every premise as requiring rigorous definition and demonstration. In other words, the optimal approach would be to assume absolute ignorance, employing this tabula rasa as our point of departure. Regrettably, however, such conditions are impossible to establish. Knowledge must arise from a foundational basis. Some premise must be acknowledged as established, lest we find ourselves perpetually compelled to define one unknown quantity by means of another. Conversely, we must hesitate to accept as established givens those concepts that are fundamentally unknown, merely presupposed, and therefore constitute the very objects of our inquiry. Should we commit this error, we are liable to succumb to the dilemma in which positivism currently finds itself, by which I mean that general intellectual trend grounded in the data of those sciences presently regarded as empirical and positive. This philosophy is predicated upon the existence of matter or energy, that is, of force or motion, notwithstanding that, in reality, matter and motion have always remained the unknown variables x and y, defined solely in terms of one another. It must be abundantly clear that one cannot accept the object of inquiry as a given premise, nor is it logically permissible to define one unknown by means of another. The result is nothing other than the equivalence of unknowns x equals y, y equals x. This tautology of unknowns constitutes the ultimate conclusion at which positivist philosophy arrives. Matter is defined as that which undergoes the alterations termed motion, while motion represents those alterations occurring within matter. What, then, do we truly know? We know that from the very dawn of consciousness, humanity is confronted by two self-evident facts: the existence of the external world in which we reside, and the existence of our own internal psychic life. Neither can be definitively proven or disproven, yet they remain undeniable facts. They constitute our fundamental reality. One may contemplate the reciprocal correlation of these two realities. We may attempt to reduce them to a single unity, that is, to regard the psychic or inner world as a mere component, reflection, or function of the external world, or, conversely, to view the external world as a projection, reflection, or function of the inner consciousness. Such a procedure, however, constitutes a departure from empirical observation, and any such conceptualizations of the world and the self will lack the quality of self-evidence to the ordinary, non-philosophical mind. On the contrary, the sole indubitable reality remains the antithesis between the self and the non-self, between our internal psychic existence and the external world. We shall return to this fundamental thesis in due course. Thus far, however, we possess no grounds upon which to challenge the obvious reality of our own existence, our inner life, and the world we inhabit. Consequently, we must accept this duality as our primary datum. This, however, is the sole premise we are entitled to accept as given. All else requires proof and definition in terms of these two primary data: space and its dimensions, time, with its progression of past, present, and future, quantity, mass, substance, and number, equality and inequality, identity and difference, cause and effect, the ether, atoms, electrons, energy, life, and death, all elements that underpin our purported knowledge are, in truth, unknown entities. From these two fundamental realities, the presence within us of psychic life, encompassing sensations, perceptions, conceptions, reasoning, emotions, and desires, and the existence of the world outside of us, there immediately arises our conventional and intuitive division of all known things into the subjective and the objective. Whatever attributes we ascribe to the external world are termed objective, whereas those we attribute to our own psyche are designated subjective. We apprehend the subjective world directly. It resides within us, and we are unified with it. In contrast, we conceptualize the objective world as existing externally, distinct and separate from our being. We perceive that were we to close our eyes, the objective world would persist unaltered, just as we observed it. Conversely, if our inner life were to disappear, the subjective world would vanish, yet the objective world would endure as before, just as it existed prior to our existence, when our subjective world did not yet exist. Our relationship to the objective world is most precisely defined by the fact that we perceive it as existing within the frameworks of space and time. Indeed, outside of these conditions, we can neither conceive nor imagine it. Broadly speaking, we assert that the objective world comprises entities and phenomena, that is, objects and the alterations in their states. Phenomena exist for us in time, whereas physical objects exist in space. Yet, such a division of the subjective and objective realms proves unsatisfactory. Through rational analysis, we can establish that we possess direct knowledge only of our own sensations, perceptions, and conceptions. We comprehend the objective world merely by projecting the causes of our sensations outward, assuming that external entities embody these causes. Consequently, we discover that our comprehension of both the subjective and the objective worlds may be valid or invalid, accurate or erroneous. The criterion for determining the validity of our knowledge of the subjective world lies in the relational structure of our sensations to one another, as well as the intensity and nature of the sensation itself. In other words, the accuracy of a given sensation is verified either by comparing it with another of which we are more certain, or by the intensity and distinct character of the experience itself. The criterion for evaluating the accuracy of our knowledge of the objective world is identical. We harbor the illusion that we define the objects and phenomena of the objective world by comparing them with one another, and we believe we are uncovering the laws of their existence independent of our perception. This, however, is an illusion. We have no knowledge of things in isolation from ourselves, and we possess no means of verifying the accuracy of our comprehension of the objective world other than through our sensations. Since the remotest antiquity, the nature of our relationship to the true causes of our sensations has remained the primary focus of philosophical inquiry. Thinkers have consistently recognized the necessity of resolving this query. The proposed solutions have oscillated between two extremes. From the absolute denial of external causes altogether, asserting instead that the origins of our sensations reside entirely within ourselves, to the conviction that we do comprehend these causes, that they are manifest in the phenomena of the external world, that these phenomena constitute the cause of sensations, and that the ultimate cause of all observed phenomena resides in the motion of atoms and the oscillations of the ether. It is presumed that our current inability to observe these motions and oscillations is merely due to the limitations of our instruments. It is believed that once sufficiently advanced technology is available, we shall perceive the movements of atoms as clearly as we now observe, through powerful telescopes, stars whose existence was once entirely unsuspected. In modern philosophy, Kant's system occupies a middle ground regarding the origin of sensations, rejecting both extremes. Kant demonstrated that while the causes of our sensations do indeed reside in the external world, they are entirely inaccessible to sensory perception, the means by which we apprehend phenomena, and thus remain, and must forever remain, fundamentally unknowable. Kant demonstrated that all knowledge acquired through the senses is mediated by time and space. Indeed, outside of these dimensions, sensory apprehension is entirely impossible, rendering space and time the indispensable conditions of our sensory receptivity. Crucially, he established that spatial extension and temporal existence are not inherent attributes of objective reality, but rather qualities of our own sensory faculty. In reality, independent of our perception, things exist apart from space and time, yet we are forever precluded from perceiving them outside these dimensions. In apprehending objects and phenomena through the senses, we inevitably superimpose the conditions of space and time upon them, as these parameters are native to our mode of perception. Consequently, space and time, which delineate all that we cognize through sensory means, are themselves merely forms of our receptivity, intellectual categories, or the prism through which we observe the cosmos. In other words, space and time do not represent properties of the world itself, but rather characteristics of our apprehension of it, filtered through our sensory constitution. From this premise, it follows that the world, independent of our cognition, possesses neither spatial extension nor temporal duration. These are attributes that we ourselves project upon it. Our conceptions of space and time are generated within the intellect upon its encounter with the external world via the sensory organs, and they do not exist in the external realm independent of this contact. Space and time are intellectual categories, attributes ascribed by the mind to the external world. They serve as cognitive signposts, markers of our own creation, essential because we are incapable of conceptualizing the external world without their aid. They are, in essence, the schemata by which we represent reality to ourselves. By projecting the causes of our sensations outward, we map these causes within space, conceiving of a continuous reality as a succession of temporal moments. This operation is indispensable, for an entity devoid of definite spatial extension, occupying no specific locus and possessing no temporal duration, cannot exist for us in any capacity. An object situated outside of space, divorced from the concept and category of spatiality, would be utterly indistinguishable from any other object. It would occupy the identical position and coincide with it entirely. Similarly, all phenomena removed from time, divorced from the temporal concepts of prior, present, and subsequent, would coexist simultaneously in a state of complete undifferentiated confusion, and our limited intellect would be powerless to isolate any single moment within the infinite variety. To avert this, our consciousness distills distinct groups from the chaos of impressions, allowing us to construct perceptions of objects within space and time according to these organized sensory clusters. We must find some method to differentiate entities, and we do so through the categories of space and time. Yet we must remember that these divisions reside solely within us, within our cognition of things, rather than in the things themselves. We remain ignorant of the true relations that exist among objects in themselves. Indeed, we do not grasp real things, but merely their apparitions and phantoms, remaining blind to the actual relations governing reality. Simultaneously, we recognize with certainty that our classification of entities into spatial and temporal categories does not correspond to the divisions inherent in things in themselves, independent of our receptivity. We know precisely that if any division does exist among things in themselves, it cannot be spatial or temporal in the conventional sense of those terms, for such differentiation is not an attribute of things, but rather of our sensory-derived knowledge of them. Furthermore, we cannot determine whether the spatial and temporal divisions we perceive would remain valid if observed through non-human eyes or from a non-human vantage point. Indeed, we cannot dismiss the possibility that our world would present an entirely different aspect to an organism of a different biological constitution. While we are incapable of perceiving objects as mental images outside the parameters of space and time, we routinely conceptualize them independent of these dimensions. When we speak of that table, we envision a specific object situated in space and time. Yet when we refer to an object made of wood, not intending any singular item, but speaking abstractly, our reference encompasses all wooden objects across the globe and throughout history. An imaginative mind might conceive of this as a singular, colossal wooden entity, composed of every wooden object that has ever existed in any location, with these individual items serving as its constituent elements. Though we may not grasp these ideas with absolute clarity, it remains generally evident that while we perceive exclusively within space and time, we conceptualize independently of them. Kant designated his philosophical framework as critical idealism, in contrast to the dogmatic idealism championed by George Berkeley. According to the tenets of dogmatic idealism, the external world, its objects, and the true causes of our sensations possess no existence outside of our consciousness. They exist solely to the extent that we perceive them. The entirety of the world we apprehend is merely a reflection of our own minds. Conversely, Kantian idealism acknowledges an external world of causes but asserts that we cannot know this world through sensory perception. Broadly speaking, everything we perceive is our own creation, the product of a cognizing subject. Thus, in the Kantian view, all attributes we discover in objects are projected onto them by our own minds. Apart from ourselves, the true nature of the world remains entirely unknown, and our cognition of things shares no commonality with things as they exist external to us, that is, as things in themselves. Moreover, and of paramount importance, our ignorance of things in themselves is not a consequence of insufficient empirical knowledge, but rather stems from the fact that sensory perception is inherently incapable of apprehending the world as it truly is. Consequently, we cannot reasonably assert that while our current knowledge may be limited, we shall gradually accumulate more information and eventually arrive at a true understanding of the cosmos. Such an assumption is false because our empirical knowledge is not a distorted perception of a real world. Rather, it is a highly refined perception of an entirely phenomenal, unreal world that manifests around us the moment we engage with the world of true causes, a world to which we cannot find the path, as we are hopelessly lost within an illusory material realm. For this reason, the advancement of the empirical sciences brings us no closer to the knowledge of things in themselves, or of primary causes. In the Critique of Pure Reason, Kant affirms that nothing which is intuited in space is a thing in itself, nor is space a form inherent to things as an objective property. Rather, objects in themselves remain entirely unknown to us, and what we designate as external objects are nothing other than mere representations of our sensibility, whose form is space. The real, correlated thing in itself is neither known nor can ever be known by means of these representations, a matter about which, in empirical inquiry, no investigation is ever made. The objects we intuit are not, in themselves, identical to our representations of them in intuition, nor are their inherent relations constituted as they appear to us. Indeed, if we subtract the subject or even merely the subjective constitution of our senses in general, then not only do the nature and relations of objects in space and time vanish, but space and time themselves dissolve. What the nature of objects might be, when considered as things in themselves and apart from the receptivity of our sensibility, remains entirely obscure to us. We possess no knowledge beyond our own mode of perceiving them, a mode peculiar to us, which, though not necessarily common to every sentient being, is universal to the human race. Even were we to elevate our empirical intuition to the highest possible degree of clarity, we should not thereby advance a single step toward comprehending the constitution of objects as things in themselves. To assert, therefore, that our sensibility is merely a confused representation of things, containing solely that which pertains to them as things in themselves, and this beneath an accumulation of distinct features and partial representations indistinguishable to our consciousness, constitutes a distortion of the concepts of sensibility and phenomenization, rendering our entire doctrine on the subject vacuous and futile. The distinction between a confused and a clear representation is purely logical, possessing no bearing upon content. Hitherto, Kant's propositions have persisted in the precise form in which he left them. Notwithstanding the multiplicity of philosophical systems that emerged during the 19th century, and despite the numerous scholars who have dedicated themselves to studying, commenting upon, and interpreting Kant's treatises, his foundational propositions have remained largely undeveloped. This is primarily because the majority of readers are fundamentally unequipped to read Kant, consequently dwelling upon the trivial and non-essential while disregarding the core substance. In truth, Kant merely posited the question, presenting the world with a problem and demanding a solution, yet without delineating the path toward its resolution. This circumstance is routinely overlooked in discussions concerning his work. He propounded the enigma, but offered no resolution. To this day, we reiterate Kant's propositions, holding them to be incontrovertible. Yet, for the most part, we conceptualize them quite inadequately, failing to correlate them with other domains of our knowledge. The entirety of our positive science, including physics and biology, is constructed upon hypotheses that stand in direct contradiction to Kant's propositions. Furthermore, we fail to perceive how we ourselves project the attributes of space and extension upon the external world, nor do we comprehend that the world, the earth, the sea, trees, and mankind cannot inherently possess such extension. We remain incapable of understanding how we might perceive and measure this extension if it does not exist, or what the world, in itself, represents if it is devoid of extension. Yet, does the world truly exist? Or, as a logical consequence of Kant's philosophy, must we concede the validity of Berkeley's thesis, denying the existence of the external world save within the imagination? Positive philosophy maintains a highly ambiguous relationship with Kantian thought, simultaneously embracing and rejecting it. It accepts his views, deeming them correct insofar as they relate to the immediate experience of the sensory organs, that which we perceive through sight, hearing, and touch. That is to say, positivism acknowledges the subjectivity of our receptive faculties, admitting that everything we perceive in objects is projected upon them by ourselves, but restricts this admission solely to the direct experience of the senses. When addressing scientific experience, however, wherein precise instruments and mathematical calculations are employed, positivism evidently deems Kant's view invalid. It assumes that scientific inquiry discloses the very essence of things and the true causes of our sensations, or, if it has not yet achieved this, that it nevertheless draws closer to the objective reality and will eventually elucidate it. In opposition to Kant, positivists remain convinced that a clearer apprehension of phenomena brings them into direct acquaintance with things in themselves. By conceptualizing physical phenomena as etheric vibrations or as electromagnetic operations and calculating their dynamics, they believe they are beginning to grasp the very substance of things and the causes underlying these phenomena. In other words, they believe in the precise possibility of that which Kant denied, the comprehension of the noumenal essence of things through the investigation of phenomena. Moreover, numerous physicists deem even a rudimentary acquaintance with Kant unnecessary, and would find themselves unable to define precisely their intellectual posture toward him. To be sure, one may remain ignorant of Kant, but it is impossible to refute him. Every description of physical phenomena, in its every term, is inextricably linked to the problems Kant formulated, maintaining some definite relation to them. Broadly speaking, the stance of science regarding this division between the subjectively imposed and the objectively cognized is exceedingly precarious. Indeed, to formulate its conclusions, scientific inquiry is compelled to adopt numerous purely hypothetical suppositions as established facts, as indubitable data requiring no proof. Furthermore, physicists frequently overlook a highly significant circumstance. In his treatise, The Analysis of Sensations, Ernst Mach observes, "In the investigation of purely physical processes, we generally employ concepts of so abstract a character that, as a rule, we think only cursorily or not at all of the sensations that lie at their base. The foundation of all purely physical operations rests upon an almost inexhaustible series of sensations, particularly if we take into consideration the adjustment of the apparatus that must precede the actual experiment. Thus, it can easily happen that the physicist who neglects the psychology of his own operations fails to see the forest for the trees, overlooking the sensory element that lies at the very foundation of his work. Psychological analysis has demonstrated that this is by no means surprising, since the physicist is perpetually operating with sensations. Mach here directs our attention to a matter of paramount importance. Physicists do not deem it necessary to acquaint themselves with psychology, let alone integrate it into their conclusions. Yet, when they possess some acquaintance with psychology, specifically that branch which treats of the forms of receptivity, and attempt to account for it, they exhibit a most fantastic duality of opinion. They resemble the orthodox believer who strives to reconcile the dogmas of faith with the arguments of reason, finding himself obliged to believe simultaneously in the creation of the world in 7 days, a mere 7,000 years ago, and in geological epochs spanning hundreds of thousands of years, as well as in the theory of evolution. He is consequently forced to resort to sophistry, demonstrating that by 7 days is meant 7 epochs. Yet, precisely why there should be 7, he remains powerless to explain. For the physicist, the role of the creation is played by the atomic theory and the ether with its undulatory vibrations, and furthermore by electrons, and the energetic or electromagnetic theory of the universe. On occasion, the situation is even more egregious. For the physicist, in the depths of his soul, senses the fallacious nature of all scientific theories, both old and new, yet fears to remain suspended in mid-air, as it were, or to seek refuge in mere negation. Possessing no system to replace that whose falsehood he already senses, he dreads taking a plunge into sheer vacuity. Lacking the courage to declare that he believes in nothing at all, he accouters himself in mutually contradictory theories as though donning an official uniform, solely because with this uniform are associated certain rights and privileges, both external and internal, chief among them a certain confidence in himself and in his milieu, which he lacks the strength and resolve to relinquish. The skeptical positivist is the tragic figure of our era, analogous to the atheist or unbelieving priest of the age of Voltaire. From this horror vacui emerge all dualistic theories that posit the simultaneous and independent existence of spirit and matter. On the whole, to an objective observer, the state of contemporary science must present a subject of profound psychological interest. Across all branches of scientific inquiry, we are assimilating a formidable array of facts that disrupt the harmony of established systems. And these systems preserve themselves only through the strenuous efforts of men of science, who endeavor to close their eyes to a mounting succession of new facts that threatens to submerge everything beneath an irresistible torrent. Indeed, were we to assemble these system-shattering facts, we would find them so abundant across every branch of knowledge as to far exceed those upon which our current paradigms are established. The systematization of that which remains unknown to us may yield far greater insights toward a profound comprehension of both the cosmos and the self than the systematization of that which, in the estimation of the exact sciences, we are presumed to know. Chapter 2. The Problem of Higher Dimensions. As previously observed, Kant formulated the problem, yet he offered no resolution, nor did he indicate the path toward one. Furthermore, not a single one of Kant's recognized commentators, interpreters, disciples, or detractors has succeeded in discovering a solution, or even the avenue leading thereto. I discern the initial glimmerings of a correct apprehension of the Kantian problem, and the first intimations of a potential path toward its resolution, in those endeavors that seek a novel treatment of the problem of space and time, incorporating the concept of the fourth dimension and of higher dimensions in general. An engaging compendium of the various advancements made in this direction is provided by C.H. Hinton, author of the treatises A New Era of Thought and the Fourth Dimension. Hinton observes, among other insights, that commentaries on Kantian philosophy typically emphasize only its negative aspect. Specifically, the premise that we can cognize objects solely through sensory perception, within the constraints of space and time, is viewed as an impediment that prevents us from perceiving things as they are in themselves, precluding any possibility of apprehending their true essence, projecting onto them qualities that are not inherently theirs, and ultimately alienating them from our consciousness. Yet, if we accept Kant's proposition in its literal simplicity, refusing to perceive spatial conception as an obstacle to proper receptivity, but recognizing rather that we apprehend things through the medium of space, it becomes equally permissible to regard our spatial sense not as a restrictive limitation that obstructs our perception of the universe, but as a positive instrument through which the intellect organizes its experiences and cognizes the external world. In many treatises addressing this subject, there prevails a certain tone of despondency, as though this spatial apprehension were a veil interposed between ourselves and nature, obscuring the latter from our view. Yet there is no necessity to surrender to such a sentiment. The primary postulate of the present work is the unreserved acknowledgement that it is precisely through the medium of space that we apprehend reality. Space, indeed, is the instrument of the intellect. Quite frequently, an assertion that appears profoundly abstruse and difficult to comprehend is merely the sophisticated form in which acute thinkers have cast an eminently simple and practical observation. For the moment, let us examine Kant's monumental doctrine of space from a pragmatic perspective, which resolves to this: the cultivation of our spatial sense is of paramount importance, for it constitutes the very apparatus through which we conceptualize objective reality. According to Kant, this spatial sense, or the intuition of space, represents the most fundamental capacity of the human mind. Yet, I find nowhere any record of a systematic and rigorous education of this spatial faculty. its development is left entirely to the vagaries of chance. Nonetheless, the deliberate cultivation of this spatial sense introduces us to an entire spectrum of novel conceptions. Fichte, Schelling, and Hegel developed certain intellectual trajectories and authored remarkable treatises. However, the genuine successors to Kant are Gauss and Lobachevsky. For if our spatial intuition is the mechanism by which we perceive, it logically follows that there may exist diverse modes of spatial intuition. Who indeed can define the nature of absolute spatial intuition? Such an intuition of space must inevitably be conditioned, so to speak, by the nature and limitations of the being that employs it. Through an extraordinary analysis, the aforementioned eminent geometers have demonstrated that space is not bounded in the manner that ordinary experience would suggest, but rather that we are entirely capable of conceptualizing alternative forms of space. In a new era of thought, Hinton devised an intricate methodology for the training and refinement of the spatial sense by means of exercises utilizing groups of cubes of diverse colors. The aforementioned volumes are dedicated to the exposition of this system. In my estimation, Hinton's exercises are of theoretical interest, yet their practical utility is confined to those who possess a cognitive disposition akin to Hinton's own. Mental exercises conducted in accordance with his system must primarily foster the ability to conceptualize objects not as they appear to the eye in perspective, but as they exist geometrically, learning, for instance, to envision a cube simultaneously from all sides. Overcoming the illusions of perspective in this manner results in the expansion of the boundaries of consciousness, thereby generating novel concepts and enhancing our capacity to perceive analogies. Kant established that the expansion of knowledge under our current parameters of receptivity cannot bring us any closer to the comprehension of things in themselves. Nevertheless, there exist theories asserting that it is possible, through conscious effort, to alter these very conditions of receptivity, thereby drawing nearer to the essential substance of things. In the aforementioned works, Hinton endeavors to synthesize the scientific foundations of such hypotheses. Our space, as we conventionally conceptualize it, is perceived as bounded, not in its physical extent, but in a particular manner that becomes apparent only when we consider our methods of measuring spatial objects. Specifically, we find that there are only three independent directions along which a physical body can be measured. It must possess height, length, and breadth, but no dimensions beyond these. Should any other measurement be attempted, this new parameter will invariably prove to be a compound of the three primary dimensions. It is impossible to locate any point within a body that cannot be reached by traversing some combination of these three established directions. Yet, why should space be restricted to merely three independent directions? Geometers have demonstrated that there is no theoretical necessity for the bodies we measure to be thus constrained. Indeed, all physical bodies subject to our measurement are so limited. Consequently, we arrive at the conclusion that the space we employ to conceptualize ordinary objects within the universe is restricted to three dimensions. Nevertheless, it remains entirely possible that there exist beings inhabiting a world wherein they would conceptualize a space of four dimensions. One can postulate extensively regarding spaces of higher dimensions than our own, and analytically resolve numerous problems that naturally arise therefrom. Yet, can we conceptualize a four-dimensional space in the same intuitive manner that we conceptualize our own? Can we conceive of a four-dimensional body as a coherent entity possessing distinct properties, in the same way we conceptualize a body of definite form within our familiar space? In truth, when approached systematically, the conceptualization of four-dimensional forms presents no greater difficulty than does the comprehension of solid three-dimensional shapes, nor does it entail any genuine mystery. Once the faculty of four-dimensional apprehension is acquired, or rather, once it is elevated to conscious awareness, for it resides latently within everyone in an undeveloped state, a vast new horizon unfolds. The intellect experiences a profound expansion of its powers. Through the employment of this more spacious medium as a mode of thought, a path is cleared by utilizing the very truth which, when initially articulated by Kant, appeared to confine the human mind within such rigid boundaries. Our perception is inherently subject to the condition of spatiality. Yet space is not so limited as we initially suppose. The subsequent step, having cultivated this capacity for conceptualization in a more expansive space, is to investigate the natural world to discern which phenomena may be elucidated by four-dimensional relationships. The scholarship of past eras has relied upon the concept of a three-dimensional space, utilizing it to categorize a myriad of phenomena and to derive rules of immense practical utility. The path that lies immediately before us in the future is that of applying the concept of four-dimensional space to the phenomena of nature, and of exploring what may be discovered through this novel instrument of apprehension. For the advancement of knowledge, it is necessary to segregate the subjective elements, the personal attributes that we project onto all things cognized by us, from that which is cognized, so that our attention is not diverted from those properties which we, in substance, perceive. Only by purging these subjective elements from our receptivity do we position ourselves to formulate rational inquiries. Only by relinquishing the conception of the sun's circular orbit around the earth do we pave the way to study the sun as it truly exists. Yet, the most insidious aspect of a subjective element is that its presence is never even suspected until it has been thoroughly eradicated. To comprehend the significance of this subjective element within our receptivity, let us imagine ourselves suddenly transported to a distant region of the universe, where we encounter intelligent beings and engage in discourse with them. Were we to inform them of our terrestrial origin and describe the sun as a luminous, thermal body revolving about us, they would reply, "You have indeed disclosed something concerning the sun, but you have likewise revealed something regarding yourselves." Consequently, in our desire to convey objective truths about the sun, we must first divest our knowledge of that subjective element introduced by the orbital motion of our terrestrial home around it. One of our primary endeavors must be to eliminate these subjective elements from our comprehension of the spatial arrangement of objects. The relations of our universe, or our immediate space, with respect to the broader domain of four-dimensional space remain entirely undetermined. Comprehending this actual relationship will require profound study. Yet, once grasped, it will appear as inherently natural to us as the terrestrial position among the other planets does at present. I would divide the study of arrangement into two distinct classes: those which engender the faculty of arrangement, and those which employ and exercise it. Mathematics exercises this faculty, though I do not believe it engenders it. Unfortunately, in the contemporary pedagogy of mathematics, the pupil is frequently cast into a vast system of symbols. Consequently, the utility and significance of these symbols are entirely lost to them. Among the possible units suitable for the study of arrangement, I select the cube. Indeed, I have found that whenever I adopted any other unit, I went astray, became bewildered, and lost my bearings. Progress with the cube may not be rapid, yet everything remains perfectly transparent and uncomplicated, coalescing into a coherent whole wherein every constituent part is self-evident. Our endeavor, therefore, shall be as follows. A systematic study by means of cubes of the phenomena of arrangement, wherein the process of learning must be active, consisting of the physical construction of these cubes. In this manner, we shall bring our intellects into direct contact with nature. A new era of thought. Taking all these factors into consideration, we must endeavor to define clearly our comprehension of those facets of receptivity treated by Kant. What is space? Regarded as an object, that is, as perceived by our consciousness, space represents for us the form of the universe, or the form of the matter contained within it. Space possesses an infinite extension in all directions. Yet it can be measured in only three mutually independent directions, namely, length, breadth, and height. These directions we designate as the dimensions of space, and we assert that our space possesses three dimensions. It is three-dimensional. By an independent direction, we mean in this context a line situated at right angles to another. Our geometry recognizes only three such lines, which are mutually perpendicular and non-parallel. Yet why only 3 and not 10 or 15? This remains unknown to us. And here lies another highly significant fact. Whether owing to some mysterious property of the universe or to some cognitive limitation, we cannot even conceive of more than three independent directions. Yet, we speak of the universe as infinite, and since the primary condition of infinity is boundlessness in all directions and in every conceivable relation, we must presuppose within space an infinite number of dimensions. That is to say, we must postulate an infinite number of mutually perpendicular, non-parallel lines. And yet, among this infinite multitude, we remain cognizant of only three. It is typically in such a guise that the question of higher dimensionality presents itself to the ordinary human consciousness. Since we are unable to construct more than three mutually independent perpendiculars, and if the three-dimensionality of our space is contingent upon this restriction, we are compelled to acknowledge the indubitable fact of the limitations of our space in relation to broader geometric possibilities. If, of course, the properties of space are engendered by a limitation of consciousness, then this restriction resides within ourselves. Regardless of the source of this limitation, its existence is an undeniable fact. A given point can serve as the vertex of only 8 independent tetrahedrons. Through any given point, it is possible to project only 3 mutually perpendicular, non-parallel straight lines. Operating upon this foundation, we define the dimensionality of a space by the maximum number of lines that can be drawn within it which intersect at right angles. A line upon which no perpendicular, that is, no second line, can be constructed constitutes linear or one-dimensional space. Upon a plane, 2 perpendiculars are possible. This constitutes superficial or two-dimensional space. Within our spatial domain, 3 perpendiculars are possible. This constitutes solid or three-dimensional space. The concept of the fourth dimension arose from the hypothesis that, in addition to the 3 dimensions recognized by our geometry, there exists yet a fourth, which remains for some reason obscure and inaccessible to us, that, supplementary to the 3 known coordinates, a mysterious fourth perpendicular is possible. This hypothesis is essentially founded upon the observation that there exist within the world objects and phenomena that undoubtedly possess real existence, yet remain entirely incommensurable in terms of length, breadth, and thickness, residing, as it were, beyond the confines of three-dimensional space. By real existence, we understand that which produces a definite effect, possesses distinct functions, and serves as the cause of other phenomena. That which is non-existent can produce no action, possesses no function, and cannot act as a cause. Yet there exist diverse modes of existence. There is physical existence, identified by specific actions and functions, and there is metaphysical existence, recognized by its own manifestations and operations. A house exists, and the concept of good and evil likewise exists, but they do not exist in the same manner. A singular method of proving existence is insufficient to establish both the reality of a physical house and that of an abstract idea. A house is a physical fact, whereas an idea is a metaphysical fact. Both physical and metaphysical facts exist, but their existences are of a different order. To demonstrate the validity of the division into good and evil, a metaphysical fact, I need only establish its possibility. This has already been sufficiently demonstrated. Conversely, to prove that a house, a physical fact, might exist by no means implies its actual existence. Proving that a man could own a house does not constitute proof of his ownership. Our relationship to an idea and our relationship to a house are entirely distinct. It is possible, by a certain physical exertion, to destroy a house, to burn it, to demolish it. The house will cease to exist. But consider an attempt to destroy, through sheer effort, an idea. The more one endeavors to contest, dispute, refute, or ridicule it, the more the idea is likely to propagate, flourish, and gain strength. Conversely, silence, oblivion, inaction, and non-resistance will eradicate, or at the very least attenuate, the idea. Silence and oblivion will not demolish a house, nor will they damage a single stone. It is manifest that the existence of a house and that of an idea are of entirely different orders of reality. Of such disparate modes of existence we are aware of many instances. A book exists as do the intellectual contents therein. Musical notation exists, and so does the melody that those notes conspire to create. A coin exists, and so does its purchasing power. A word exists as does the energy inherent within it. We discern, on the one hand, a sequence of physical facts, and on the other, a series of metaphysical ones. Just as facts of the former category exist, so too do those of the latter, albeit in a different manner. From the customary positivist perspective, it will appear highly naive to speak of the purchasing value of a coin independently of the coin itself, of the energy of a word apart from the word, or of the contents of a volume separately from the physical book, and so forth. We are all aware that these are merely figures of speech, that in reality purchasing value, the energy of a word, and the contents of a book possess no independent existence, and that through these concepts we merely denote a series of phenomena somehow linked to the coin, the word, or the book, yet substantively distinct from them. Yet is this truly the case? Having resolved to accept nothing as pre-established, we shall consequently negate nothing as such. Within objects, we perceive an internal dimension in addition to their external form. We know that this internal element constitutes an integral part of things, indeed, often their primary substance. Naturally, we must inquire where this internal element resides, and what it represents in and of itself. We observe that it is not contained within our spatial domain. Consequently, we begin to contemplate the notion of a higher space, one possessing more dimensions than our own. Our space then appears to be but a fragment of this higher spatial realm. We begin to recognize that we perceive, feel, and measure only a portion of space, specifically, that part which is measurable in terms of length, breadth, and height. As previously noted, we customarily regard space either as a form of the universe or as a form of the matter therein. To clarify, one might say that a cube is the form of the matter comprising a cube, a sphere is the form of the matter within a sphere, and space, conceived as an infinite sphere, is the form of the entire matter of the universe. In The Secret Doctrine, Helena Blavatsky observes the following regarding space. The superficial absurdity of assuming that space itself is measurable in any direction is of little consequence. The familiar phrase can only be an abbreviation of the fuller form, the fourth dimension of matter in space. The progress of evolution may be destined to introduce us to new characteristics of matter. Yet the formula defining space as the form of matter in the universe suffers from this deficiency. It introduces the concept of matter, which is itself an unknown. I have previously remarked upon that conceptual impasse, x equals y, y equals x, to which all attempts at a physical definition of matter inevitably lead. Psychological definitions culminate in the same result. In a well-known treatise, The Psychology of the Soul, A.I. Herzen says, "We call matter everything which directly or indirectly offers resistance to motion, directly or indirectly produced by us, manifesting a remarkable analogy with our passive states. And we call force that which directly or indirectly communicates movement to us or to other bodies, thus manifesting the greatest similitude to our active states. Consequently, matter and motion represent projections, as it were, of our active and passive states. Clearly, it is possible to define the passive state only in relation to the active, and the active only in relation to the passive, resulting once again in two unknowns defining one another. In an essay entitled Idealism and the Problem of Nature in the Quest, E. Douglas Fawcett discusses matter from this perspective. Matter does not give us any trouble. We know all about it for the very good reason that we invented it. By matter we think of sensuous objects. It is mental change of concrete but too complicated facts, which are difficult to deal with. Strictly speaking, matter exists only as a concept. In truth, the character of matter, even when regarded merely as a conception, is so far from obvious that the majority of individuals are unable to articulate precisely what they mean by it. An important truth is thus brought to light. Matter and force are merely logical concepts, words adopted for the designation of an extensive series of complex facts. For those of us educated almost exclusively within the physical sciences, this is difficult to grasp clearly. Yet in substance it may be formulated as follows. Who has ever witnessed matter and force, and under what circumstances? We perceive objects, we perceive phenomena. Matter, independent of the substance from which a given object is fashioned or of which it consists, we have never beheld and never shall. Yet the substance in question is not matter itself, it is wood, iron, or stone. Similarly, we shall never observe force in isolation from motion. What does this imply? It implies that matter and force are abstract conceptions of the same order as value or labor, the purchasing power of a coin, or the contents of a book. It signifies that matter is of the very substance of which dreams are made. And just as we can never grasp this substance and can perceive it only in dreams, so too we can never touch physical matter, nor see, hear, or photograph it, apart from the object itself. We cognize objects and phenomena that are beneficial or detrimental, yet we never cognize matter and force independently of these objects and phenomena. Matter is as much an abstract conception as are truth, goodness, and evil. It is as impossible to introduce matter, or any portion thereof, into a chemical retort or crucible as it is to vend Egyptian darkness in vials. Nevertheless, as it is rumored that Egyptian darkness is sold as a black powder on Mount Athos, or elsewhere, perhaps somewhere, by someone, even matter has been glimpsed. To discuss inquiries of this nature, a certain intellectual preparation is required, or a high degree of intuition. Do you want access to this and all the complete audiobooks on the channel, plus the ebook version? Click the link in the description or scan the QR code in the left corner of the screen to access our library, where you can listen to your favorite esoteric books without ad interruptions, lock your screen, or use other apps while the narration plays, and even download the ebook version to follow along as you listen. Listen on your computer via web browser, or download the app from the Play Store. After subscribing, you will receive an email with your login details, password, and step-by-step instructions on how to access the books through the Hotmart app.